Hello, fellow nerds. My name's AJ, and we're back again for the second round of what we're doing with our end-to-end encryption app. For a quick recap, if you're just now stopping by and you missed the video last week, the link will be in the description below. I described that I'm going to start looking at building an end-to-end encryption messaging app. The idea being that two people can talk to each other, and nobody, even the server that's in between, can decipher what those messages are saying. And we're going to go through all the steps of how this application should be built. And the idea is that I'm mostly just trying to work out my own knowledge, my own abilities. There's a few holes in my abilities when it comes to web development, and some of them are things like progressive web apps or PWA, security and encryption, web file and data storage. So there are several things that I want to improve my own education on, and I felt like building an application that kind of accomplished that would be a great way to get started. And I figured while I'm at it, I might as well just show you what I'm up to, because this isn't something I'm worried about showing the world. And then when we're all said and done, we'll actually load it on my website, ajchef.com, and people can play with it, and maybe we'll even talk to each other. Today, I want to talk about the process I went through in order to build this design so that you can see what this app might look like and kind of the things that I do in order to build design for applications. Before we jump into the design itself, there's a few things I want to talk about and a couple things to remember when building a new design. The first is your design does not have to be perfect. When I show you the design that I have, I'm going to show you some major flaws in my design. I'm not concerned about it being pixel perfect. That's what a designer would say. A pixel perfect design is they expect you to code the exact thing that they have in their design. We're not worried about that. We're going to use a library for most of our stuff. I don't exactly know all the specs of the library, so I just toss stuff in until it looked good. And when we go to code it, we're going to use the library, so we're not concerned about everything looking exactly perfect. The main goal of this is to make sure that we have all the components and pieces we need in order to build the application we intend to build. We're not so worried about the pixel perfect part. But that brings us into the second thing we got to remember, which is our design needs to meet our requirements. So in this case, I went through 2 passes of design. So I sat down and kind of worked out a design. I'm going to show you a little bit of the tools that I used to accomplish that. And then the second stage, I went back and reread the requirements that we had stated previously in the previous video or the article, if you read the article, and made sure that my design met all those specs. And so when we go through the design and I show you all the pieces, I'll point out several places that I forgot, and you guys can see exactly what I'm talking about here. So some of the tools I decided to use, in this case, we're going to use a product called Affinity Designer. Affinity Designer is like Adobe Illustrator. It's good for web development or any kind of UI, UX development. Other products are like Sketch, are really good. And then now there's new products out there like AI that you can utilize to get different ideas from. In fact, I'm going to show you kind of what I did with a product called Galileo AI. So you could see how I took their suggestions from their user interface and kind of built my own. So I didn't really steal exactly what they had in their design or in their AI tool, but I was able to build something using that. And but I'm going to use Affinity Designer. I like that it's a one-cost thing. I paid once, I don't have to pay again. I think Sketch has a subscription, Adobe has subscriptions. I just like the ability to buy the app and then use it, and I've been using this for a long time, so it's been really good for my uses. We're also going to use something called Material UI. Material UI is a React UI library. So instead of trying to code everything ourselves, we can pull in some of these things that are pre-built, things that have nice styling, they work together well, so we can just kind of plug and play and we don't have to think about too much in order to use the Material UI library. And that's good because we want to skip that work of thinking about those things because we want to get down to actually building our application. The last thing that I used was something called a design sheet. I was able to just Google a Material UI design sheet for Affinity Designer, and I found it's someone who actually built a design sheet. I'm going to show you what that looks like too, because that made this much, much easier. And if you plan on doing something similar, like building your own application or building a website or whatever, this method helps out tremendously, and almost universally, someone has already done this work for you. So there's no reason to have to go back and redo a lot of this stuff. Before I jump into the design, I just wanted to point out to you guys that I do have a website, ajchef.com, where I'm posting articles on all these exact same topics. So if you're interested in reading about what I'm doing and what I'm up to and kind of seeing the different pieces of this going into making a full-blown application, you can visit me there and watch there, or you can follow me on YouTube. I'm trying to put them in both places because I know everybody kind of learns slightly differently. All right, so let's take a look at our design. So this is the design that I have right now. I kind of split it off based off of Like if you look at the flow, this is the entry, and then I kind of split it off based off of what you might go to next. This is kind of the normal path flow in the middle, and then these are kind of offshoots, meaning that these are either windows or views that'll open by clicking on something in the middle one here, or it's an alternate view for something in the middle, and I'll get into that. But let's zoom in at the beginning and talk about what we have. So we have, or we set up in our requirements the ability to just get started by putting in your email address and hitting a button. The idea is that we're going to skip the whole login process and just go straight to the second factor authentication. If you have that email access to that email address, you have access to this account, we're going to let access to that email address be the thing that is the real security here. And we're not going to attempt to try and add some kind of crazy security, but maybe in the future. I think it would be kind of cool to do something with like an authenticator app. I think that would be kind of neat, but for now, we're just going to do it this way. And I put in a little bit blurb at the bottom here that just says, this is for fun. Please don't, try to sue me if you make mistakes and you lose important information, that kind of thing. So as soon as you hit sign up with the email here, you're going to go to this next one, which is going to ask you for the 6-digit code sent to your email address. And then we could send another code after a certain amount of time if they haven't found it yet. And then if you're logging in, you're going to see your view of chat streams. And we'll come back to that in a second. But if you're signing up for the first time, I'm going to force you into this workflow where you select a handle. Because we're trying not to get any information from users, we're trying to hold as little information as possible. We already have to have their email address, but it creates a little bit of a security flaw if we allow users to search for people based off of email. Because what ends up happening is if you have a giant list of emails that you collected from some other source, and then you plug it into here and you could see if it returns something, you get some information about the user, and we're going to try to avoid that completely. So we're going to have users select a handle. This handle is what's going to be the identifier for that user throughout the application. So if I'm at AJ Chef and somebody else is at Billy Bob 24, if we type those in, that's how we're going to find each other in the application, not by email or any other kind of factor. So that way we can prevent information from leaking by mistake from this application. So let's scooch on over. Here's now our main view. So when I was talking earlier about going back through and doing a second pass to make sure you met requirements, something I had totally forgotten was this whole pending review quest part right here. So I had all these chat threads going, and I thought, okay, great, everything's working out. And then as I'm reading the requirements, it says in there the ability to accept or decline a request for a new thread. And I was like, well, got to go back and add that now. So that's a good way of making sure that you're getting everything into your application that you need to get in without having to do it during the coding stage. Because once you hit the coding stage, then it becomes way harder. If we forget something and try to go add it in later, it's more difficult. If we do it wrong and then we have to go back and change it, it becomes more difficult. If we have data in the database, especially if we're live and things are working and then we need to change something, that becomes extremely difficult. So it's much easier to do this in the design phase where we go back, we look at our requirements. Oops, we forgot to add accept and decline for particular threads. I want to make sure that you can open and collapse this. So this will just show up as you have 2 pending requests. And then when you tap it, this opens up and then you can accept or decline. Otherwise, you just see your threads here. Some of the other stuff that I thought about, and the other part of designing that I think is kind of cool is that we create new requirements that we hadn't thought of before as well. So I guess that's kind of a flip from the previous statement. But in this case, I thought it would be nice to add in the ability to see that we don't have access to a particular thread. I'll zoom in on that a little bit. So we're in this thread, but we don't have the exact right key. It's either missing or invalid. And we can show that here. So that way the user can see something's wrong with this thread. I got to figure that out. So the key, if you recall from last time, is going to be images. I may be changing that. I've talked to several people once this design was created. We'll get there at the end. But the key is essentially the item in which you lock and encrypt the messages before they leave the device. And so that's very important when dealing with an end-to-end encryption style software. And then we have groups. I didn't really know how to handle the names for now, so I'll kind of show you in the settings what that might look like. And then we have this at the top, find friend or start conversation. So because we have very little data about the user, including we have very little data about the messaging themselves, like these threads. We can't really do a search through these threads, at least on the back end for the server. So the front end would have to do the search. I'm not convinced yet, because I don't know exactly how the technology works for storing data on the front end. I'm not going to bite off more than I can chew. I know for a fact we can search for people, so we're just going to do that for right now. And when you search for people, you're just going to get a list of people that match whatever that search is. So it could be random people. It could be people already in your threads. It could be group chats with the same person in it. So we're kind of getting the threads and an individual in the same kind of search view here. We're going to reuse this view in a little bit here, and I'm going to kind of show you. But last on this main stack here, we have the actual chat conversation. Might look something like this. And we're going to keep it real simple. We've got our bubble for typing. We've got our link. Just to show you guys, this black box does not come with the icons. This icon will just be a white icon on this page, and it'll look much nicer. I just didn't have the time or energy to cut it out, so I just left it there. And same for all the other icons that you might see throughout this app. Like I did the same thing over here. And that's another example of it doesn't have to be perfect. And then we got timestamps and then the person who might have sent it. At the top, we see the person who we're chatting with. Maybe it's a group. And we have some kind of settings view here that we're going to click on if we want to change some stuff. Coming off, a split off the main thread here, we have some settings. For right now, the only two requirements we have are log out. We're just going to destroy all sessions for a particular user. So let's say you logged into this at the library, and then let's say you logged into it on your personal device, and they're both logged in at the same time, which is definitely possible. And the person at the library is messing with your data. So you could log out here, kill all the sessions that currently exist, and then go back and re-sign in using your email, and this device will be the only one signed in. So it's a kind of a manual security protection for users if they need it. And delete account. So because this is like a fun project, people might want to put some stuff in here and everything. We want to give them the ability to cancel out. I don't want to make this weird where, I become the guy who's now like keeping all your information and then we battle on social media because I kind of do that. So just to make everything easy, there's a delete account button. It deletes everything about you, any trace that you've been to this application. And if you felt like starting over, that would be the way to do it. All right, coming back over to the messaging thread, we have one more view on that. And again, going to remove this black box, but we need some empty thread or error type view. So the idea is instead of having messages here in the middle, you might have something that says something like this. Either your key you're using is wrong or no key has been set for this thread. Contact the thread owner to make sure you have the correct key. So this is if you don't have the key on that thread. We could also do something like, messages are empty, type below to kick off the conversation. We could also add in errors like it appears you're offline, we can't collect new information. Anything can go into here, and we can change the icon to make it look, however we need to make it look so that it makes sense for this. But this is a good empty state or error state view. And then I think lastly is this view, which is probably the most complicated. And it's a little busy. I'm going to try to work on making this a little bit less busy. But the idea is if you were to start a new thread or go into the settings for an existing thread, it would look something like this. And you would have the ability to upload a key. So right now it's an image that you're uploading to use as the key to protect the messages. A note explaining what that is, because I think that it's not totally clear to everyone how that works. And I think being clear as possible is going to help people learn. We need the ability to share it. So we don't want to share it within the application because that creates a security flaw. So we want to be able to share it outside of the application. We want to be able to add members. So this view could open if you were to click Billy Unknown over here, and it automatically adds Billy Unknown to a new chat thread that you're creating. And we can add more people by clicking this button. Additional members can always be added. Right now I'm keeping a limit because I don't exactly know the limits of the data storage that we're dealing with. So I'm trying to keep it, at a deterministic amount. And then because we're not storing information about the user, we're going to allow people to name the user and add a photo for that user. So like Billy McEnglish over here has his photo and his name attached to it. This is the same way we can do that. It gives the user kind of like a contacts on a phone where we are the ones who put in the name of the person. They don't get to dictate what their name looks like on our devices. And social media is kind of the exact opposite. Everybody sets their stuff, and however they set it is how it publicly appears on everybody else's devices. We're going to do a kind of contact style where basically you're adding the person's phone number or handle in this case, and then you can add their name, and then you can add a photo if you want. And that's going to prevent us from having more information about people than we want to have. And we can remove them from this thread. And then lastly, if it's a group thread, we want a thread name. And that's how we're kind of solving what we're going to do up here. Maybe we don't need that in the long run. I'm not totally sure, but for now, that's what we'll do. And since all this information is editable after the thread's been created, this becomes the config thread view. So if you're already got one going, and let's say we want to change Billy's name, we can tap on this, come down here. Maybe, we misspelled it, so we can change it here. Maybe we want to change his photo. Maybe we want to remove him altogether. I don't know. But that's about it. So we got a full-blown UI, full-blown design created. And then now we can actually start working on the next bit, which I'll explain at the end here. All right, so I promised a couple of things that I learned along the way. One of them was when I posted the article on Twitter, someone came back, and I can't remember the Twitter handle. I want to give them credit, so I'll put it in the description. I'll go find it before I post this video. I'll put it in the description. And they made a really good point, which is if someone got the entire library of photos from a user and they were able to get an encrypted message, they could just sit there and try each image until eventually they could decrypt the message. And there's nothing we could do. We can't put a rate limit on that because they have all that data locally on their own stuff. And they'd be able to eventually hack it if that image exists. Another problem that someone pointed out, I think it was the same person, is that if you transfer images between devices, their compression changes. So if you have like image go over text versus iMessage versus whatever, the image might not always be guaranteed to be the same. And so I was thinking about that and thinking, okay, we want to solve that. I do like the idea of doing an image, but maybe there's something else we can do. Maybe it's just going to be like a key or a string. And then as a response, one of my friends had pointed out that we could use a QR code. And I thought that might be fun because that's a new space I haven't messed with, and it might be interesting to find a QR code generator. And we create the QR code, we paste it in there, and then you can share it. So it just shares it like it's an image, and it doesn't matter what the compression is. As long as the QR code itself remains intact, we'll be able to scan and read that QR code in order to get that key out. So that might be a better way of handling this. And then we can regenerate that at any point in order to, start the thread over or whatever we want to do. So that way, that kind of defeats the whole brute force hacking. If you were to get the encrypted messages but not have that QR code, it would be insanely difficult, if not impossible, to break into that message. And that's ultimately what we want to accomplish. All right, I totally forgot to show you. So jumping back in here, some of the tricks that we used, we talked about the design sheet. I wanted to show you what the design sheet looked like. So if we tap over here, someone built out all the components for Material UI in this design sheet already. This is built in Affinity Designer, and we could see things like text fields, we could see calendars, we could see buttons and how all the buttons are, we could see light and dark mode and what it might look like. It even shows things like typography, so you could see what the basic typography is for this particular library, for the Material UI library. We get some system icons down here that you can grab if you want. In our case, I just copy and pasted them off of the website, or I screen capped them, which is why it's got that black border. And pretty much everything that you could need, including this header. That's where I got the header for our stuff, the page headers for our stuff. And I was able to just copy and paste these elements right on over to our design. So if you look, I copy and pasted this input, copy and pasted buttons, copy and pasted text, so that I didn't have to sit there and think about all these individual details. I was able to just go ahead and produce something and add buttons or move items around so that I didn't have to think about what the design might look like. I'm not personally a professional designer. I'm an engineer. So the design part is more difficult for me. I struggle through some making things look good. So I'm going to always use a design library by default. And if I could just copy and paste the elements from the design library instead of trying to rebuild them by scratch, it saves so much time. So I would say that's definitely like a top tier item to have when going through this design process. It made this so much faster and I was able to get through it much quicker. So that wraps up design for what I'm calling Echo to Echo. If you noticed, I like that idea. That's Echo is the military designation for the letter E, like a radio designation for the letter E, and E2E is a shorthand for an end-to-end encryption. So E2EE, end-to-end encryption. We're just going to call ours Echo to Echo, kind of give it a little spice there. I'm not deploying this. I'm not buying the echo2echo.com domain. When I do deploy it, it'll deploy on ajchef.com. So maybe echo2echo.ajchef.com, and that's where we'll put it. So if you feel like stealing it, by all means, knock yourself out. But feel free to tag me on Twitter so I know that it exists and I can brag about it a little bit. I think that'd be pretty cool. So that wraps us up. So lastly, the next step, what we're going to do next is what's called proof of concept. Probably my favorite step. Proof of concept is where we build an application that won't have most of this functionality, but we're going to pick the really hard parts that we're unsure about, and we're going to build those parts first, and we're going to see if we can produce something that works. So some of the stuff that we're going to need to work on is installing the Material UI library, making sure that it works. The progressive web app part is one of the predominant ones. Whatever our solution is for the key down here, we're going to need to figure that out. Maybe notifications. I haven't really figured out or thought about notifications, but that might be interesting. So we just need to prove the hard parts that we're trying to accomplish so that when we go to actually build our application, we already know that this works and we know how to accomplish it. And that's going to save us tons of time on the actual coding part. If we get to the point where it's like, we need to store data into the user's device, into local storage, and we figure out we can't do something really specific like storing a small image file. Like if that's just impossible, well, that changes the entire scope of this project. And if we were to code all the way to the point where we're uploading a user image file, for Billy McEnglish, and that fails because we just didn't know that wouldn't work, we've built this entire application and we hit the end. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen. I don't expect that to happen. But just as an example, we need to make sure that this works the way we think it's going to work. And then we have code showing that it works that we can use in our project when the time comes for us needing that. And that's going to clear up a lot of headaches when we go to actually code. I like the proof of concept stage because it means that we get to play around with all this cool stuff and figure out what's going on. And then once we go to release it and actually code the thing, it's just going to go through like butter, and we'll be able to do some videos maybe where we're coding live and I can show you like how we're putting these things together. And I think it'll look really cool, really fun. We're also using something called Next.js, which is a library that will allow server-side rendering and client-side rendering. And that basically means we can do things extremely quickly, and we could also cache results going back to the front end using service workers through the PWA. And I know that's a lot to explain, but the idea is we want you to open the app and the app works. We want you to send messages and that works. We want everything to be like as instant and responsive as humanly possible, because that's what's going to keep people interested in what we're doing and why it's so cool. And then if someone were to come along and see what we've done and are doing something similar, they can take away these lessons because we're going to make the code public. Anybody can mess around with it if they want. And hopefully this will help me out, and it'll help you out, and I'll see you guys next time.